Hey, welcome to the Prophecy Roundtable for an insightful and entertaining chat about the end times. I'm your host, Dr. Douglas Hamp. It is my pleasure to be here with you. Scott and I have a special guest. I'm really excited to introduce him to everybody. You've probably seen him. He's a pretty famous guy. So he's got some awesome insights, and I'm really delighted to have you on the show, Derek. Thanks for being here. This is fantastic.
No, it's an honor. Thank you, Doug. We've
Yeah.
been, trying to think about where we met the first time, and I think it was out in your neck of the woods at one of the prophecy conferences in Colorado, maybe back around 2012.
Well, 2012, it was at Branson, actually.
Branson, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. It was.
Yeah. And so Rob Skiba was there, and he believes in the one incursion theory. I believe in the two incursion theory.
Right.
Incursions.
That was where we recorded that session in the auditorium with Rob and L.A. Marzulli and you. And, that's when I was still trying to figure out what this whole thing meant. I was just, happy to be there to ask questions of you guys.
Yeah. That was a lot of fun. That was a great conference. I enjoyed that. That was a good time. So yeah, and then can you believe that's been almost 11 years? 10 and 11.
Well, I find it hard to believe, except when I start looking at those old pictures and realize how much less brown is in this beard than there was back then. So,
oh man, I hear that. Yeah. Well, hey, before we get started, I want to let people know that we are going on a trip to Israel in April of 2024. So you can join us, thewaycongregation.com. Go there and you get information about it. It's going to be awesome. So do check it out. And if you want to support this program, you can go to patreon.com/Doug Hamp and give as little or as much as you want. Big thank you and a shout out to all the patrons already. Thank you guys. I'm hoping to get to 100 patrons. That would be just mind blowing. So if you want to join that, you know where to go. Patreon.com/Doug Hamp. And let's get into it. So tonight we're talking about the Great Reset, digital dollars, and transhumanism. I mean, that is a mouthful, right? But these things are upon us. And I go to Drudge Report frequently, and I'm seeing them talk about digital dollars in the mainstream, right? So when it's in the mainstream, you know that, okay, we've kind of turned a corner somewhere, right? Because I think we in the prophecy circles, we've been talking about digital currencies and, a lot of these different things, but here it comes, right? So I don't know, what's your experience been, Derek?
I've had to do a little educating on this myself. Full disclosure, Sharon and I don't own any Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency. We don't really plan to. I know that fiat currencies have their own issues because there's really nothing backing the United States dollar except our faith that the United States government is going to make good on it if you hand over the piece of paper that you'll get something in exchange for it. But since 1972, when Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, there's really nothing tangible behind it. But at least it's a piece of paper. When you're talking about a cryptocurrency, and I know there are probably people watching who are fans of Bitcoin, and I do understand the advantages of Bitcoin specifically, as opposed to cryptocurrencies in general. But a friend of ours, Guy Malone, who is the guy who was behind those really foundational Bible UFO conferences, the Ancient of Days conferences in Roswell, New Mexico, back in the early 2000s. He's now a copy editor for Bitcoin. And so I've been able to kind of tap him a couple of times for information. Is Bitcoin the mark of the beast? And he explained, no, it is not. And it cannot be, because it's a decentralized currency where no one company, no one CEO, no government has control over Bitcoin. So as long as you hold your digital wallet and your Bitcoin is in your digital wallet, okay, you're protected. But this is why governments like the United States, China, the European Central Bank for the European Union, the Bank of England, 50 nations around the world are either testing or have already rolled out their own central bank digital currency, or CBDC. And that's a different animal altogether.
Yeah.
And the New York Federal Reserve Bank is in the middle, as we're recording this right now tonight, it's in the middle of a 12-week trial run of a federal bank-backed digital dollar.
Yeah. I just wanted to back up a little bit. Some people may not be aware that, the Federal Reserve was created in 1914. It was created on Jekyll Island, and there's a great book called The Creature from Jekyll Island.
Right.
If people want to take a look at that. And
In
this,
fact, G. Edward Griffin was at that same
that's
conference in
right. That's right.
2012.
Yeah, that's where I got to meet him. I got his book, and I loved his book. I thought he did a fantastic job. And I just want to say that this stuff is not conspiracy. Like, this is all very well documented, right? And part of the things that people don't understand is that the U.S. dollar, as issued by the Federal Reserve, is not federal, right? This is a private company we don't know where the money goes, but they're making a lot of money. All right. How do they do it? They create it out of thin air. So you were just talking about there's nothing backing the US dollar except our faith, right? But we do have these things called the greenbacks, right? So we have that. So this system has been in place for, roughly 100 years. And that is something, right? There's something going for that, right?
Right.
But we're talking about something different, right? And obviously with Bitcoin, so there's going to be 21 million that will be issued at some point. And of course, they have to mine these, which means that these computers have to crunch out these algorithms to try to, solve these mathematical equations. And when they do, then bling, a Bitcoin comes into existence. And of course, they take more and more electricity to compute these things. It takes a lot of electricity to do this.
Yeah.
So that's a major downside to it. But we've seen with the whole cryptocurrency system, the whole universe of it, it's been crashing down rather loudly in the last 6 months or so. We just had the FTX that Sam Bankman-Fried, and that whole thing turns out that was a Ponzi scheme, and the one before that was a Ponzi scheme, and the Gemini exchange, that's now under investigation, right? And so what people were like, this is the greatest thing ever, it's gonna do away with central banks, and yet they are facing the same problems as the central banks. Okay, so in comes the digital dollar. So now you have the US government backing this thing, but then you have a digital type of currency that is different than the dollar, right? So that's what we're getting at. So please,
the fundamental difference with the digital dollar or any central bank digital currency, CBDC, is that it is controlled by the government, or in the case of the Federal Reserve Bank, the corporation that has the charter from the United States federal government to create and control the currency. And that is the fundamental, it automatically right there, you lose the one advantage that Bitcoin has, which is financial privacy.
Right.
No one person, no one company has control of your Bitcoin and how you spend it. Again, as long as you are keeping that Bitcoin in your own digital wallet and not putting it into the hands of a cryptocurrency exchange like FTX, or Binance, Binance, which is FTX's main competitor.
Right.
Binance is now being investigated by the Southern District of New York, and there are prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office there who are convinced that they need to press charges against the Binance for money laundering and so forth. The disadvantages that they keep coming up with for these crypto exchanges are the same ones that they use against using cash.
And let's just explain that, I don't think that the government is necessarily against cryptocurrencies. I think that you have bad players that are scamming people out of their life savings. Right. I've invested a little bit in crypto, and I've lost a bit. Okay. Thankfully I didn't lose my shirt, but I lost a little bit, and it all seemed legit. It all seemed right. And compared to some of these people, mine was just like a little drop in the bucket, but some people lost the bucket. Yeah. And it's pretty sad, So
what the government is against is cryptocurrency that they don't control. And again, that's the one advantage that cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin have, is that they're outside the control of central banks.
But let's explain. See, I don't think that the government is just like, I want to control this thing, but I think because
yes, they do.
Wait a second.
They do.
Wait a second.
I haven't said a word, Doug.
Well, good. Hold on a second, Scott. You'll get to talk. So anyway, you have people that are getting scammed, right? So then the government is being pressured to step in
Right.
and say, okay, we've got to do something because we are the government. It's our responsibility to make sure our citizens are protected, right? So again, I don't think that there's some cabal in some dark corner. We've got to have this under our control. But it's more of an organic kind of thing, that one thing leads to another. And then eventually we have a system where it is going to be controlled by the US government. And then Mr. Bad Guy, the Beast, the Antichrist, whatever you want to call him, he steps in and says, aha, now I've got you. Right. So, again, that's where I just don't think that everything is a conspiracy. I think that Satan is pretty smart, and he might be, doing the synthesis, antithesis, and then synthesis, right? Or excuse me, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? I think he is setting these things up, but I don't think the individual players are all all scheming in the back room trying to figure this out.
No, I agree. I think a lot of the human players in this are just dupes. They're useful idiots for the principalities and powers behind the scenes, which is who Paul said are real wrestling matches against. It's not against human opponents, against these entities behind the scenes. And they are maneuvering these entities, these human actors rather, into position to lay the logistical framework, the infrastructure for the kingdom of Antichrist. And a digital currency, a global digital currency, is one that is a key element of that, because it not only eliminates financial privacy, which is bad enough. I mean, if you've got a digital dollar, for example, and every dollar you spend is monitored and tracked, because the ledgers have to be kept by somebody. The Federal Reserve suddenly knows everything you're spending money on, but they can also program this currency so that you can only spend it when and where they allow you to spend it.
Right.
So that becomes something that looks an awful lot like the description of the mark of the beast.
Yes.
You've reached your meat quota. No more gas for you.
Yeah, that's right.
It's true. Right. It's coming.
I agree. I'm not disagreeing. So let's put this into a practical scenario. Let's say that the government wants to incentivize people to buy solar. Okay. So instead of giving you a rebate that you get from the government, they'll say, look, if you use your digital dollars, and we know that you're using it to buy solar, we're going to then give you a little bonus on top of that, or we can somehow make it so that you can do this. On the other hand, we don't want you to buy a gas car. We can make those credits harder to use when you're trying to get a gas car, right? So these are just a few of the scenarios where they could really turn up and turn down the volume on this stuff as to what it can be used for. So let's say that the government allocates, the entire U.S. population can spend $500 million on used cars, and after that, sorry, right? Because we need to sort of plan the economy. I mean, this is China's big dream, right? Like, wow. And to some extent, a major extent, they're already doing that in China. But of course, the Chinese yuan is not the world reserve currency. The dollar is currently, and that's what really gets our attention, right?
And we'll see how long that lasts as this global bifurcation continues with the proxy war between NATO and Russia. On the one side, you've got NATO, which is led by the United States and our minions, for lack of a better word, who are pushing this conflict with the Russians. And please understand, I'm not defending Vladimir Putin or his decision to go in and invade last February. But the consequences of this are that it's forcing the world to choose sides. And on the other side of this equation, you've got Russia, China, and India. And right there, you got and then most of the global South, with the exception probably of Australia and New Zealand, the rest of the global South is aligning with the BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Saudi Arabia is now part of this, and Egypt wants to be a part of it. Iran is part of this axis as well. So you've got like 70% of the world's population on that side of the equation, with a huge amount of the natural resources between Russia, Saudi Arabia. Venezuela will be part of that. aligned on the other side, the United States, the neocons and the neolibs in Washington, D.C., the political elites in Washington, D.C. and London, who are pushing this and think they can impose their will on the rest of the world, I think are finding out now that this is just not going to happen. Between Russia and China and Saudi Arabia, the amount of resources they control, especially with China's heavy investment in Africa with rare earth minerals, there is a rude awakening coming for the Western world as we pursue this suicidal, anti-human goal of net zero. It is absolutely crazy. And this will be part of the digital dollar, I predict, the digital currency. Patrick Wood, who's written the book Technocracy Rising back in 2014, I think it was, a book that everybody should read because it lays out this agenda, shows that this is not a new thing. This has been in the works by political elites around the world, globalists, since the 1930s. And this is going to be tied to something, forget your social credit score, we're going to have carbon credit scores. This pops up in the news fairly frequently. In fact, just this week, another German scientist suggested that everyone in the world should be limited to 3 tons of carbon emissions per year. Now, that's about a quarter of what we average Americans emit just through living, heating our homes, driving to work and back, whatever. We emit about 12 tons of carbon per year. They want us to cut back to 3. And then if you go over that, you are penalized. So how do they get us to change our lifestyle so that we're, freezing in the winter, burning up in the summer, and walking to work and back? They tie our universal basic income through a digital currency to our carbon use. And you get a carbon currency out of this that is basically the ledger is kept digitally like a digital currency. This, again, is not a new thing. This was floated back in the 1930s for the first time, but now we're finally getting to a point where there are serious academics, influential thinkers who are putting this idea out there. Well, China and India are going to sit back and say, look, Germany, France, United Kingdom, US, Canada, you guys want to do that? You go ahead. You go ahead. We're going to keep burning coal over here to develop our economies. And you guys just, keep regressing back to the 17th century in terms of energy consumption and use. And we'll see who winds up winning this game at the end. Now, so I don't think we're going to get there before the Lord returns. At least I pray that's the case, because I think the generations to come, if these globalists keep pursuing this green agenda and seriously make progress toward implementing this, imposing this green agenda on the rest of us, the next generations here in the Western world are going to enjoy a standard of living that is substantially lower than what we have today.
I just pulled up. So this right here is a bunch of Chinese girls who are showing off their credit scores, their social credit scores. Okay, so I want people to see that this is real. It's already happening, and they're all quite proud of it, right? And they're all trying to get up to about, let's see, I think it's 1,200 is the top that you can get to. And so they want to get to that. So what is a social credit score? Well, did you go visit your mother in the hospital? All right, you get points for that. Were you a good citizen and you didn't jaywalk? Okay, you get credit for that. Did you pay your taxes? Well, of course, you get credit for that, and part of it's going to be sort of your FICO score in a sense, but it's so much more. And, the scary thing is that it makes sense on a surface level. Don't we all want to be good citizens? Yes. Don't I want you guys to be good citizens? Yes. Wouldn't I want you to be rewarded for being a good citizen? Well, of course, right? It all makes sense. But the trouble is you can also be penalized. Right. But that makes sense too, right? I don't want people to be doing illegal things. The trouble is when I start doing something that may be righteous in God's eyes, but then the government says, I don't really think that's what I want you to be doing. I don't want you talking against the government. I don't want you to be nice to the Uyghurs. I don't want you to say pro-Western things and anti-Chinese things. Right. And so when you do that, if you do that, then they can say, okay, your credit score goes down. You can, and if it goes down too low, then you cannot use high-speed rail. You can't fly. You can't do certain things. Certain companies will not play with you. You become ostracized, really, and you become a prisoner in your own home simply because you're not going along with the agenda. So now imagine that is then tied in with the digital currency, right? I mean, that's what you're talking about here, Derek, is that, we could find ourselves in big trouble in the not too distant future. That's
Yeah,
what's
yeah. No,
Going,
that's
it's
exactly
going
right.
to happen. I mean, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I mean, unless John just got lucky about, I don't know, 1950 years ago when he wrote down Revelation. I mean,
Yeah.
we're just seeing it come together and converge. And I don't know where you are on this, Derek. You mentioned about Jesus, Yeshua returning. I have believed since I was a kid that there's a 7-day plan, a 7,000-year plan, and I don't think all this is converging, aligning, and accelerating. To borrow from our friend John Haller, all at this time, we're seeing it all actually come to fruition. Whereas in the past, it was more theory. You had some barcodes, or the barcode's the mark. You didn't have this global surveillance system, this ability to control every purchase, this ability to say, no, you're going to have this medication, and you're going to have this for a passport, and you're going to have this to have a bank account. I had a cold for a while, so.
Right. No, that's it's all right. No, you're absolutely right. Things are coming together. We're living in the first technological age where things that John and that Daniel saw, 2,000, 2,500 years ago, are now technologically possible. And I have no doubt that God will make some of these things supernaturally happen when everyone in the world sees the two witnesses, when everyone sees Jesus returning at the head of the heavenly host. That can happen and will happen supernaturally. But for skeptics now, I mean, you can say, hey, look, do you think that John knew something when he was talking about something we could only accomplish in the modern age with modern video phones and 5G technology? And that may be a way that we can open this conversation to people who otherwise might be really skeptical. Having this conversation in China would be damaging to our social credit score. And I have no doubt that as we get deeper into this period of time and closer to the end of the age, that in the Western world, this kind of a conversation would be a threat to your ability to buy and sell.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Scott?
Derek, on your research, how quickly, I mean, do you think they could literally put the system in place in the next year or two if they had the right catalyst, I won't say false flag, but if they created the right thesis with the right antithesis to reach the synthesis, which is their goal? I call them the head puppets, by the way. In other words, you refer to the principalities and the powers. They're the puppet masters. But then you've got these head puppets will be your political figures, your oligarchs, your heads of companies, like you mentioned Wood and the technocracy of these corporations that I mean, literally they're global already, and they, we saw it in Canada where they just shut down the protest. So, but.
Well, and you saw in New Zealand where the Prime Minister there, Jacinda Ardern, just yesterday announced, kind of surprisingly, that she was going to resign in February before the next election. She's not going to stand for re-election because she probably wouldn't be re-elected. But she shut down the entire nation of New Zealand when they had one case of COVID show up in August of 2021. So this is the kind of thing that will probably become more and more acceptable to the public. We look at survey after survey of college kids who believe that free speech is dangerous. And then we need to shut down free speech because hate speech is literal violence. But of course, those, the cities that burned during the summer of 2020, that was legitimate protest. It is unbelievable seeing this kind of this groupthink, this Orwellian wrong think that is being punished. If you say the wrong things, you should be deplatformed. And if you say the right things, you're rewarded, even though they make no sense. Language has been weaponized. And when it comes to the implementation of digital currencies, these are things that are being trialed with the goal of having them in place and ready to roll out in 2025. So I think we're looking at these kind of things being rolled out to us within the next couple of years. In fact, I think it's possible, and I don't have evidence for this, is just, I'm old enough to be cynical, that the collapse of FTX, which was spectacular, was like a $36 billion corporation that just, $36 billion in value just evaporated overnight.
Yep.
We can, government regulators are stepping in and saying, we need to control this industry. But we have already, as a public here in the West, have been conditioned to give up using physical currency because it's inconvenient. Hey, what's in your wallet? You're holding up the line while you're trying to count out your exact change. Just swipe your card. We were already used to the idea of digital currency. So this is how it'll be sold to us. This is just one step beyond using a debit card.
And
Go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say, and money is dirty. It passes germs like COVID viruses. Things of that nature. I mean,
and the only people who use large denomination bills are terrorists, tax cheats, and drug dealers. And that's the same argument they're making against cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. We can't track who's sending money where. They're probably terrorists or drug dealers or human traffickers.
Yeah.
And so we need to control it and have all this digital currency run through a central government.
But let's back up for a second, because part of the thing about conspiracy theories is that it makes it sound like that, again, there's some cabal out there that's trying to pull the levers and then suddenly it's all just going to happen. And oh my, no, but we're digging our own pit, right? I want to make this really clear. Is that all of us are digging the pit together, and we're going to then jump in, right? And then we're like, oh my gosh, how did we get down here? Well, we all took our shovels and we were digging the pit together, right? So when the government steps in, it's not the big bad government, but again, people lost billions of dollars. Some people, were losing whatever their big nest egg, right? They put everything they had into crypto, which was an FTX. And then when there's no way to trace it, guess what? There's no recourse for the little guy, right? The little guy is now left with nothing, right? And he's like, I want some security. I want you, government, to protect me. All right. So we're clamoring for these things.
It's almost like they let this happen, Doug, so they can regulate it. And they brought this guy down. And they brought this guy down. That way they can get their sticky little fingers on it.
But
good gracious, Doug! You just talked about the book. You just talked about the book earlier. Who are they that actually print the money and control the countries, Doug?
Well, okay, so you think it's all the federal?
I mean, you talked about it 100 years ago. You give me control of a nation's money supply, and I don't care who the politicians are because I select presidents.
Okay.
I mean, you actually talked about it.
All right.
Gosh, you got so burned by getting too far down the rabbit hole that now you can't see it in front of your face.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, we and Doug are friends, by the way.
I assumed as much.
Whatever. That's too funny. But the reason I took a step back, Scott, is because, I don't think that everything is a cabal. Now, again, I'm not saying that there isn't some dude out there, but if it is, it's like one or two people who are in that deep, dark room, they that are in that room. But for most people, this is a very organic thing. It's happening. And then we're going to find ourselves in a bad situation when the Antichrist, the beast, comes to power. And then suddenly all these systems are in place. That's my take on it. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but that's
I agree. I think that groups like the World Economic Forum and the Bilderberg Group, which the World Economic Forum has kind of taken over from the Bilderberg Group as the number one organization that liberty-minded people point to and say, see, they're the ones who are doing it. The group that Alex Jones wants to go stand out inside of their meeting with his megaphone. And God bless Alex Jones for actually, getting out and calling attention to some of these things. But we as Christians need to remember that they are the useful idiots. These are people who can't go out for a hot dog without attracting media attention. How many secret plans do you think they can actually put together with the kind of media attention that these people draw? I think, yes, they maybe want to be global rulers. They want to reshape the world in their own image. And there's no question that Klaus Schwab, the CEO of the World Economic Forum has a God complex, but they're not going to be able to pull this off. The real power behind all of these things are the ones in the unseen realm, the ones that Paul told us we were wrestling against. So yeah, let's pay attention to what the World Economic Forum is doing. And yes, they really are trying to create a world where our carbon emissions are governed, and we're eating insects instead of beef. And we're living in what they're calling 15-minute cities, where we're all 15 minutes away from all of our everything that we need. You know, this idea that we can walk to work, walk to the market, walk to the bank, walk to, you know, everything. Which, you know, again, for those of us living in places like, you know, Colorado, rural Alabama, the Missouri Ozarks, that ain't happening. You're really going to have to drag some people off the land to make that happen. That's their goal. I don't think it's going to happen, certainly not without a fight. But there are forces in the unseen realm that are guiding these people, maybe whispering in their ears. I doubt, as you say, Doug, I doubt there is seriously a dark room where people are saying, okay, our next step in world domination.
Yeah.
But things are moving in that direction anyway.
I just think Klaus Schwab is the face man. Okay, in other words, he's like the ultimate. He's like the guy on James Bond. He just needs a little kitty cat to stroke. I mean, but again, I think on the echelon, yes, on the upper echelon of power brokers, if you will, he's not even a head puppet. He's probably like the minion, if not the minion of a minion of a head puppet of the people that are. But as you pointed out, Derek, ultimately we're talking about these powers, these principalities. We're talking about this prince of Persia, this prince of Greece, that are really, if you will, within the limits God allows them to operate, if you will, exercising their control and their authority.
Well, and that's the thing.
And Psalm 2, there is a. Go ahead.
No, you started to make a good point there. Go
I was just going to say about Psalm 2. I mean, there is a conspiracy. The kings of this earth, the rulers of this earth, are plotting. I mean, we see it and Doug, you bring this up too. We see it in Revelation. They actually think they're going to gather together at the very end to battle Yeshua. They're so deceived at that point in time. They think they can win. And right now, I just think we're seeing the beginning of the end game. And Derek, I bring this up a lot. I'm not major, like go off into the deep end of predictive programming, but I talk about the Avengers a lot. It's like a role reversal in the whole Avengers movies, where Thanos is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's creator of the world, and all these other gods and superhumans and mankind unites together to fight against evil, come and judge the world because it's such a crappy place. That's exactly what the Bible says is going to happen if you don't repent. God is going to judge you. I mean, and so there is predictive programming in the movies. It's almost like they have to reveal their hand, if you will, about what they're going to do. And right. Doug, they're not hiding it anymore. You will know nothing and you will like it, as he strokes his little kitty cat. You know, that didn't go over well. So like John Haller pointed out in his midweek, that now they're changing it. They're not wanting to call it the New World Order anymore, because that sounds too ominous. So like they're calling it the New World Way. They're trying to think of a more euphemistic, friendly terms. You know, that some of us will go, oh, well, that sounds much better. So anyway, go ahead, Derek.
Yeah, and the Great Reset is being replaced with something else like that, you know, the Great Narrative or something else like that. They're coming up with some other term because too many people caught on to what they're trying to do. But again, the whole world is not behind the World Economic Forum. China, this is really interesting. China's rise to become a global economic powerhouse began in 1972. Schwab founded the World Economic Forum in 71. And in 72, the Chinese sent their first delegation to the meeting in Davos. And it was really through that they began making the contacts with Western industrialists, which began to hollow out the manufacturing capacity, especially in the United States, as self-serving capitalists in the West realized they could make a lot more money by offshoring all of those jobs that, good-paying manufacturing jobs that we used to have here in the United States. So China is now they've really kind of run into a wall here with the the pandemic policies that President Xi adopted. But aside from that, China has really become a global force, economic force to be reckoned with. And its Belt and Road Initiative is drawing a lot of the world, especially in Asia and the global South, into China's orbit, away from the United States and the West. Schwab seems to think that China is all on board with this global agenda, that we should all become like China with the social credit score and everybody dutifully following everything that our government tells us to do. I think the Chinese and the Chinese Communist Party only sees its partnership with the World Economic Forum as useful until the Western middle class has been kneecapped. And then China will assume its rightful place as the dominant superpower on planet Earth. Now, will that take place? How does that fit into a biblical prophetic paradigm? Honestly, I don't know. I don't know. What's going on behind the scenes in the spirit realm? Is there a prince of China? Probably. Are they cooperating with the Prince of Persia, Prince of Greece? Don't know. But I think we need to take that into consideration. You got 1.4 billion Chinese under control of the Chinese Communist Party, and their goals are not the same goals as the globalists who dominate the World Economic Forum.
Wow. Yeah. I think when we try to predict how it's going to look at the end, we're going to all be very surprised.
Yeah.
I mean,
at the marriage supper of the Lamb, Jesus says, everyone who got it all right, raise your hand. Oh, wait, that would just be me.
Yeah.
I mean, like John points out, who predicted the gain of function virus of 2019, 2020, and just how I will say it, Doug, just how they, the WHO, the World Health Organization, with their little two crowns wreath surrounding a serpent on the pole, were able to control and scare the crap out of like 80-90% of the population of the entire world. So much so that they then came up with a solution that never before tested on human beings. And again, who predicted that, and that what would happen in 2020 and 2021? We're still seeing the aftershocks of it, and I don't think it's over. I think they are waiting to roll out their next variant, their next pandemic, if you will. This one went so well. I mean, we just, people that, what was it, less than 1% of people that died, and most of them were either very elderly or had major health problems. Your average person that was healthy did not die. Just think if they release something that has even a 10 or a 20 or 30% death rate and really affects children. How easy that would be to control the world.
I've actually got those numbers in front of me. There's a peer-reviewed study that was just published January 1st in Environmental Research, the infection fatality rate, and this was before the vaccines were rolled out. So before the experimental serum was delivered to the public, the infection fatality rate for people between the age of 0 and 69 was 0.095%, or slightly less than the average infection fatality rate for the seasonal flu. If you were under the age of 60, the infection fatality rate was 0.034%. And I mean, if you're under the age of 30 or 40, you might as well forget about it. It's like your odds of surviving are like 99.99%. It's just ridiculous. And yet, when you look at the surveys of people, and there's a real break. I mean, conservative and liberal here in the United States, conservatives kind of understood that this wasn't as dangerous as we were being told, but progressives thought that if you caught it, there was they literally believed it was like a 50% chance you were going to have to go to the hospital and then die. And that is just so far removed from reality, but that's because of the messaging that we were getting from the mainstream media, because it was this plan. Yeah.
And Doug doesn't like the orange man, by the way, but it was the orange man that claimed to be the father of the not a V. So anybody putting their hope in Papa T, please don't do that.
Yeah.
He was just as instrumental in rolling out the jabby jab as anybody.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so tell us how transhumanism fits into all this. That's too fun.
Well, I think it's because of the fourth industrial revolution, which is part and parcel of the World Economic Forum's great reset or great narrative, or whatever they want to call it. The fourth industrial revolution is just another term for transhumanism. And transhumanism fundamentally is this idea that we're going to overcome death through science. When you take it even further, at its most extreme, it's a belief that we shall be as gods, that we can somehow enhance ourselves, not just make ourselves less vulnerable to diseases like SARS-2, but to make us to enhance our abilities, make us more cognitively powerful, to extend our lifespans to these radical lengths. This is what they are looking for.
They've got, like Captain America.
Yeah. We would all be like Captain America, the
like
Winter
Captain
Soldier.
America.
Yeah. Faster, stronger, better, live longer. But ultimately, it's all about becoming as gods, fulfilling that promise made by the serpent in the garden and back in Genesis 3. And it sounds crazy when you start looking at these initiatives that are being put forward by the transhumanists, but there's some real big money and some very influential minds behind this. Genetics, robotics, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology. It's a very convenient acronym, GRAIN. Those are the technologies that transhumanists hope to use to overcome death. You've got people like Peter Thiel, who is a major supporter of Donald Trump, by the way. I should point out he spoke at the Republican convention in 2016. I think he spoke again in 2020, but Thiel, who's the co-founder of PayPal, early investor in Facebook, who's donated millions of dollars to a foundation called the SENS Research Foundation, that is a nonprofit that is trying to cure aging, as though it's a disease that we can cure. But the research projects that they put their money into have been conducted by institutions like Yale, Harvard, Cambridge, University of Texas, Rice, University of Arizona. So again, not fringe universities. And this is a guy who has been taking human growth hormone pills to extend his life. And about 6 years ago, said during an interview with Inc. magazine that he was interested in a process called parabiosis, which is taking transfusions of blood drawn from young people so that you will live longer. I mean, to me, that sounds like, the blood is the life, Mr. Enfield.
Sounds like a vampire. Sounds like a vampire.
Dracula straight up,
Yeah. And of course, Dracula was quoting from the book of Genesis. The blood is in the life, which is why you don't eat it.
Why?
Right.
While we're talking about the Orange Man and transhumanism and living forever, I think it was his son-in-law that lives at 666 Avenue that was saying this was a quote. I actually read it.
Jared Kushner,
Jared Kushner said, I think that his kids might be the generation that never dies.
Correct.
So this is not just us prophets. I call us all prophecy geeks, and don't take that wrong. I've been a prophecy geek since I was like 6 or 7 years old. So, but yeah, this is not just us prophecy geeks sitting around chatting like this, going, "Oh well, people really want to go back to the garden and take and be able to become as gods." No, that's what they're trying to do. And I believe the catalyst will be when the beast arises from the abyss. And I don't know if you've read Doug's book. It's excellent, by the way, Derek.
Yeah.
He believes that's what happens is that this ultimate future final mark will be something that makes us not human, makes us immortal, makes us a little g god, if you will. So.
And I know there are others who proposed that idea as well, including Tom Horn. So we're in good company here. But when you look at the guys who are proposing this, I mean, Dr. Raymond Kurzweil, who's considered sort of the father of the transhumanist movement, the one who coined the term the technological singularity, the moment at which we merge our intelligence, biological intelligence, with technological intelligence and artificial intelligence, and suddenly we're billions, perhaps trillions of times more intelligent than we were before. I mean, the consequences of that kind of change are completely unpredictable, but that is what they're looking for. But when you get drilled down into what Dr. Kurzweil believes, and bear in mind, this is a guy who's taking 150 supplements a day trying to reprogram his biochemistry. That's what he says. This is a spiritual quest. This is not just a scientific endeavor to try to extend human life, to enhance the quality of life. It is a spiritual quest. In his book, The Singularity is Near, he wrote that there are 6 epochs of human evolution, 6 epochs of evolution, rather, and basically the transformation in how information is stored. The first epoch of history was physics and chemistry, where information was held in subatomic particles and atoms. The second epoch was biology, where information is stored in DNA. The third epoch is brains, where information is stored in neural patterns. And the fourth epoch, which is where we are right now, is the technological epoch, where information is stored in digital devices, computers, and so forth. The fifth epoch is where we hit the singularity. We see the merger of technology with human intelligence. Then we get to the final epoch of history, he believes. The sixth epoch is where the universe wakes up. The universe wakes up. The cosmos becomes saturated, and all of the inanimate matter, the dumb matter around us, becomes a substrate for computation. And we all become one with a cosmic mainframe, apparently.
Yep.
This is the guy who is considered one of the most brilliant scientific technological minds of the last century. He's the director of engineering for Google. So this is not a fringe guy. And this is his vision for the future. It is a religion. And this has been adopted as part of one of the key planks of the World Economic Forum's vision for the future. And again, when you look at it from a Chinese perspective, which is fundamentally atheistic, the Chinese Communist Party, anyway, is officially atheistic. If you believe that there is nothing that happens after your last breath, you just cease to be, why would you not pursue transhumanism? I gave a talk on transhumanism to a course at Eastern Illinois University, a class there on called World Technology. The professor was a friend. We attended the same church in Charleston, Illinois, Christian, and he wanted to expose his class to this idea. And there were a lot of people from overseas. We had some from Africa, some from India, and a couple from China. And the Chinese students didn't see why I was getting worked up about this subject. The one student who did was an older student, an adult student, who was an evangelical Christian, who said, I never thought about it this way, but I see where you're coming from. But the Chinese students are like, this sounds like a great thing. Why should we not try to use technology to become as gods? Well, through movies like The Avengers, Scott, you're right. Kids are buying into this idea. But it starts even earlier than that when you look at the popularity of, say, the Percy Jackson and the Olympians series of books. And then the other books that Disney is publishing that are complementary, drawing on the Norse pantheon, the Egyptian pantheon, the Hindu pantheon, the Mayan pantheon, the Korean pantheon. And in all of those stories, the common thread is you've got a young teen protagonist who discovers that he or she is the child of a god. And, the kids reading the stories are empathizing with the character. When you're writing fiction, as I've tried to do, you try to write protagonists that your readers will identify with. So they get it pulled into the story. And this is, I think Rick Riordan, who's the creator of the Percy Jackson series, has sold something like 95 million copies worldwide last time I checked. Wow. But, he's not the problem. He's just a symptom.
Right.
Because we're in a post-Christian, we're living here in the West in a post-Christian society.
Paganism and occultism and witchcraft are the fastest growing religions in America. I mean, and in the UK,
and they're all over the movies, like you're saying. I mean, they're really just everywhere. I think it's when we take those out of the movies and then we hear, the quotes like you just said from Ray Kurzweil. I mean, that one is quite mind-blowing. Here's another one. This is from leading transhumanist Mark Pesce. He says, once the genome was transcribed, once we knew what had made us human, we had in that moment passed into the transhuman. Knowing our codes, we can recreate them in our so-called synthetic rows of ones and zeros. Now we will reach into the improbable, resequence ourselves into a new being, debugging the natural state, translating ourselves into supernatural, incorruptible, eternal. There is no God but man. And he goes on. We seek something more, transcendence of transience, translation of incorruptible form. We seek, therefore, to bless ourselves with perfect knowledge and perfect will to become as gods, take the universe in hand and transform it in our image for our own delight. And it is on earth, as it is on earth, so it shall be in heaven. I'm like, oh, man. I mean, if
they're trying to reverse the curse. They're trying to...
Right? And again, as Derek said, I mean, if you think that you're going to just be put in the ground after this and that's it, well, of course. I mean, of course you're going to do that. That's the only logical thing is why not keep on living? Why not? Let's, in fact, I think Ray Kurzweil was asked, does he believe in God? And his answer, oh my goodness. He said, well, not yet. I mean, talk about chutzpah to say not yet. Right?
Oh.
Like we are going to create God, we are going to be that God, and Derek, I kind of forget where you stand on this, but my thinking is when the two witnesses come, and we talked about this on your show, but when the two witnesses come and they have these supernatural abilities, I think this is when the other aliens, hence Satan and all of his dudes, are going to show up and say, hey, we've been around watching out for you guys here on planet Earth. We've been just kind of making sure you stay safe and watching out for bad guys like this. And now they've come, we're here to help. And that's when I think that humanity is going to say, well, it's time for all of us to evolve because we have no other choice but to evolve. Right. So I think you got guys that are dabbling with transhumanism right now. They're doing it because it's interesting and it's exciting, but there's nothing like fear to get a huge population of people to move in in a certain direction anyway. Okay, I won't call it the right direction, but it's a direction.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw that play out over the last 3 years.
Yeah. Scott?
What and again, if we went back, let's go back to biblical times when we actually, we all believe the Bible. We see these supernatural events that occur at the Exodus. We see the supernatural event where the seas part, Pharaoh's army is destroyed. We see Elijah, we see Elisha, and then we see what happened, what Yeshua did, and then after Yeshua ascended, the early power of the early church doing miracles, literally raising people from the dead. And when this happens, when the two witnesses, and Derek, it's a they and a we approach to it. In other words, I think it's two literal people, but I also think it's the two houses, the house of Israel and the house of Judah, the church, if you will. But when that starts happening again, when things get biblical again, the world that make a choice. They've got to make a choice to either repent and believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or I think the deception will be when that during this time period, that's where Doug and I did for about 3.5 years. I believe that the two witnesses testified during the final 3.5 years of this age, and it gets biblical up in here, if you will. It's almost like a supernatural battle on this earth for those last 3.5 years, and it's choose this day whom you shall serve. Will you serve the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Will you serve Yeshua, Jesus Christ, or will you serve Satan and his minions and these false gods? So that's sort of my understanding. You got to take on the two witnesses, and when they testify, when they're witnessing.
I agree with you. I think it's going to be two literal people, and I think Doug's take on it, and this I think was something that our viewers to the program Sharon and I produce, Unraveling Revelation, really found interesting. It's kind of a science fiction take, but it makes a lot of sense because we're living in that age where these movies are making the miraculous appear real and possible. I mean, the CGI is so good, you can't tell imaginary from the real in these video productions anymore. So when these two witnesses, and I think we're looking at Elijah and Moses, but Elijah and Enoch, okay, I can see the case for that as well. But whoever, when they're calling down fire from heaven and withholding rain and doing all these miraculous things, I think Doug's take on it is going to be right, that there will be these aliens who appear and offer a solution to this problem that is plaguing and bedeviling our benevolent leader, the Antichrist over here. And when will this happen? I think this is leading up to the midway point of the 7-year period called the Great Tribulation.
Yeah. And so transhumanism is just really that first step in that direction to become gods, right? So as the name implies, transhuman, right? You're in a transition to becoming something else. What's the goal? Post-human. What is post-human? You become a god, right? And that's what's scary about transhumanism, right? So like, I think sometimes people get the sense that, well, Christians are just Luddites. Like, we're against technology. We're against all kinds of stuff. Man,
I love technology.
Me too. I love it. It's when the wrong guy gets the control switch. That's what scares me. I mean, thank God that the Nazis did not figure out nuclear technology, even though they had one of the greatest quantum physicists in the world. But they didn't figure it out. And
they came close. Yeah,
they did. I know, but they thought they needed way more plutonium than they needed, right? But thankfully, it didn't work out. But imagine if Hitler had a technology that could be used for good, but then he had it in his hands and he used it for evil. And that's where I think all of these technologies, I think the technologies are generally neutral, but the way that they can be used is either good or bad. Right. And so that's where I see a lot of this going. And transhumanism, I think some of their ideals are not wrong. I'm all for alleviating human suffering and for
Amen.
People living longer. I mean, I want to live longer. I'm not looking to jump in the grave anytime soon. But, but I know that there's also one who has promised me a new body, and I can keep patching this one up indefinitely, or I could get a new one. And that's ultimately what I need, is the new body, Yeah. And that's where society is like, oh, there's no God, And I think this also is going to be part of the strong delusion, where they really think they can fight against God because, hey, God isn't God Almighty. He's not the all-powerful, omnipotent dude that we have no chance against. No. He's just an alien. He's advanced. He's evolved, and he evolved to where he is. We can evolve too. Mm-hmm. And now that these other aliens are on our side helping us, they're going to help us jumpstart that evolution. And maybe if we combined DNA, hey, maybe we could become God's lickety split. And I think that's the basic scenario. I think the
irony here, Doug, is that I don't think they're going to achieve their goal of eternal life. They may radically extend human life with some of these technologies. But the irony, of course, in Revelation 9, as you know, is that Revelation 9, verse 6, in those days, people will seek death and will not find it. They will long to die, but death will flee from them.
Right.
So there is a day coming when that abyss opens up at the fifth trumpet, and the people who've taken this radical life extension, this genetic modification or whatever to overcome death, they'll wish they could get a refund, but it's not going to happen.
Derek, I don't think it's coincidence that that's a 5-month process. And if you go back and look in Genesis, how long did the flood last?
Exactly
5 months.
Exactly.
I believe those are the final 5 months closing out of this age. That's my personal opinion. It's interesting, and I have said that before, Derek. I have said it probably on this show 3 or 4 times, and somebody messaged me or put it in comments or something. But I would even say that those that took the mark are the ones that are going to be tormented by these demon bugs that come up out of the abyss for that 5-month period where people will seek death. it actually says, and it could be by that point in time, it says all that don't have the seal of God. So the question then is, if you haven't taken the mark, do you have the seal of God? Or are you a follower? Do you have faith in Yeshua? Or are you someone who's not taken the mark? You're still surviving, because we do know that the millennium is going to be populated by those who are not changed, or in that twinkling of an eye. So we know there are some who aren't necessarily going to be gathered who didn't take the mark. But it's what's your Doug, and we've never really discussed that, but Derek brought it up. I've said it many times. It's I always thought and kind of read into it that those people had taken the mark. But when I look at it, it's like all who don't have the seal of God. It doesn't actually say they didn't take. It doesn't actually say they took the mark. And again, I missed it and read over it and said that several times until somebody pointed out to me that, hey, dude, they don't have to take the mark. They just don't have to have the seal of God. So you could have people that haven't repented yet, if you will, aren't putting their faith and hope and trust in the beast system. They're these people living out in the Ozarks, near Derek or in certain places. Seriously, they're somehow been able to survive for this period of time. And yet if they don't have that seal of God, that seal of Yah on them, then they're going to get tormented. I think a lot of those people, if they haven't taken the mark, we go, look, okay, if they're familiar with Revelation at all, at that point in time, they might go, okay, I surrender all. They're going to walk the Baptist aisle and out in the woods, if you will.
Or they're going to surrender to the Antichrist. That's an option too.
Yeah, that would be the easy path, because it's not going to be the easy thing to do, especially once the restrainers are removed and the Antichrist is in power. It's going to be very difficult to make that decision to accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, because that's definitely going to be the more difficult path. Hey, look, come this way, worship the beast, take the mark, you can buy and sell, we can upgrade you so that you're not subject to all of these diseases, whatnot. Those Christians, they're the ones who are the haters. They're the ones who are causing all of these violent uprisings here and there, and they're the ones who are the real problem. That's why we don't allow them to participate in society anymore. But
they're spreading disinformation.
Disinformation, and that's getting people killed.
Misinformation.
Not coincidentally, that is at the current the ongoing World Economic Forum meeting right now in Davos, Switzerland. Misinformation and disinformation they're saying is the greatest threat to global security right now. With everything that's going on around the world, misinformation and disinformation is a threat. But those people who do take the mark, you got that first bowl judgment coming where they get those painful sores. So there is a special judgment reserved for them.
It's interesting. I thought about it, and I just put this in a Facebook post recently, Derek, that I believe George Orwell, when he wrote the book 1984, and I don't think the number 40 is coincidence. I think he was 40 years off. I really believe things could start getting biblical this year and definitely into 2024. So it'd be interesting if he was intentionally 40 years off, or if that was just some kind of divine, if you will, poetic prophecy. Because if anybody listening to this hasn't read the book 1984, I mean, we're getting close to living it. When you're talking about the thought police and the misinformation and the disinformation, in which they control what is true or not true, and that includes transgenderism, that includes homosexual marriage, that includes, even getting down this day and age to, when is a pedophile no longer a pedophile? All these things that Scripture calls abominations, all of a sudden are called good, and we're called evil. And it's eventually, the lady in Britain recently got arrested just for standing outside of an abortion clinic, not saying a word.
Right.
And she's taken into custody because she was praying silently. I mean, she was just standing there not doing anything.
They didn't even know for sure. The police had to ask her, were you praying? Say, I don't know. I might have been thinking about lunch,
Yeah.
But she wasn't saying anything. But because thought crime. Yeah, we thought that was an
Yeah.
Orwell invention, but yes, we're actually seeing
Minority
it
Report.
prosecuted in the UK. Yeah, yeah.
What's interesting is the other dystopian book that I think is also so prescient, besides 1984, was Brave New
Brave New
World by
World.
And I really think I think the future is a combination of those two, because in Brave New World you had people that were being programmed from birth, right? And of course, this was all happening in test tubes and stuff. But they were being programmed early on, and then they were going to the feelies, which was kind of the modern day version of movies. They had drugs galore to keep them satiated,
Medicated.
medicated, exactly. So it's kind of a combination of those two, in my opinion, of where we're headed. But it's going to feel so good. It's going to feel so natural, and that's what I think Aldous Huxley got really well, is that it felt right. You had all these things to take your mind off what was really happening, and keep you medicated, keep you entertained, and there you go. You're on your way.
Oh, Derek, and you might know the statistics better than this. I can tell you're a research guy. I'm kind of lazy, but the I really am. I'm a lawyer and I hate research, but I do remember hearing about the number of Americans right now that are on psychotropics for anti-anxiety or anti-depression. And again, I am not discounting those that have severe chemical imbalances in their brain that need medication to function daily. But this day and age, generally speaking, you're just masking a sin. You're masking an area in your life, and and then you go get a pill for it, and it masks that. And if that's ever cut off, I'm just, if the supply chain for that is ever disrupted and cut off, I can only imagine what this country would look like in a month or two. So.
Advantages, but I know that it is something that is much more prevalent now than it was decades and centuries ago. The default setting anymore seems to be, if you've got a problem, we've got a pill for that. You look at any major broadcast anymore. How many news or sports or entertainment programs are sponsored by a pharmaceutical company?
Pfizer, sponsored by Pfizer.
Exactly. So, and it may well be that it's just the profit motive is what drives this, but the net result is that you got a population that is dependent, that is pacified, and that is kept docile through the use of these medications. Ultimately, as Doug put it, I think very well, we are digging the pit into which we're going to jump.
And we do see that the whole world is deceived by her pharmakia. Now, normally that's translated as sorcery or witchcraft, but the word is actually pharmakia. Doug and I differ on this just real quick, but I would like to get your thought process on it. And it's something that I didn't really start thinking about till 2021. But the gain of function, Chinese manufactured, released into the world, and then I personally believe that and the remedy, the serum, if you will, could be, very likely is, the first seal, because the word bow that the writer holds is toxone, and it comes from when the Greeks would dip their arrows into poison for toxone, and then you've got the Stephanos, the wreath. And then on the UN and the WHO, you have the Stephanos, the wreath, the crown surrounding the serpent on the pole. And again, I believe that one's more about deception. And by golly, if the world was not deceived by what happened over the last 2 or 3 years, I don't know what deception is.
Well, Sharon and I take a little bit of a different take, and this is based on a book that we read 15 years ago. A friend of ours, David W. Lowe, wrote the book Earthquake Resurrection. And he pointed out that when the Lamb who was slain appears in heaven, that's when the seals begin to open. And we know from the book of Acts, Stephen, when he looks up as he's about to be stoned, sees, the Son of Man at the right hand of the Father. And we know from Paul's writings in Ephesians and in the author of Hebrews pointing out that Jesus is already in heaven at the right hand of the Father. So it seems like the best analysis of the opening of those seals in Revelation 6 is that those first 5 seals began to open in the 1st century AD when Jesus was caught up into heaven.
Oh, and I would agree with that, actually. I would agree they've been riding since Zechariah, if you will. You've got the 4 horses.
Got the 4 horsemen, right. But
Yeah,
Sharon, several years ago, back in 2014, she wrote a book called Ebola and the 4th Horseman of the Apocalypse. And she pointed out in a presentation at one of the prophecy conferences that we know that the rider on the pale horse is named for an entity in the Greek pantheon, Thanatos, the god of death. Thanatos was the equivalent
Avengers.
of, yeah, there you go. Yeah, Thanos, the mad titan. Thanatos is the equivalent of Mot, the Canaanite death god. And there are other equivalents in other ancient pantheons. We know that Hades is riding with him as sort of a fanboy, because without Thanatos, Hades got nobody to fill his kingdom. So you got 2 of the Greek gods riding there amongst those 4 horsemen, rider 4 and then 4A. You know, had Hades in the sidecar. So who were the other 3? So we argue that the rider on the white horse is Apollo, because, as you say, you know, the bow with the toxon, the bow with Apollo was the Greek plague god.
Plague. The plague.
Right. He spread plague with his arrows, like the Canaanite version called Resheph. And we see him a couple of times in the Old Testament, translated as plague. One place in Psalm 78, it's actually Reshephim. It's plural, you know, translated thunderbolts, which is interesting, but I digress. The rider on the red horse,
keep digressing.
Of course,
I'm loving it.
Is the rider on the red horse is the god of war, Ares or Mars. That's Chemosh, by the way. Is equated with Chemosh, the Moabite national god. And the rider on the black horse, I think, is really interesting, especially given what we've been talking about tonight with the digital dollar and the planned collapse of our economies over the last couple of years, where we shut everything down, crashed the economy into a wall. The rider on the black horse is Hermes or Mercury. Mercury, his name is based on the same Latin word from which we get commerce and merchant and merchandise. But in ancient Babylon, he was called Nabu. He was the god of scribes and the god of ledgers and accounts. When you needed to draw up a contract or a will or send a letter to somebody, because literacy was not high in ancient Babylonia, you went to one of the scribes whose patron god was Nabu. And Nabu was the one who kept track of what was, you know, the scribes would keep track of what was given to the temple, you know. So essentially, when you're dealing with lawyers and bankers, you're dealing with the ancient god Nabu. As Hermes and Mercury, he was the patron god of merchants, but also thieves, which is maybe not coincidental. I'm joking, of course.
I'm a lawyer, by the way.
I'm aware of that.
Okay.
But, you know, if the world's not being run right now by lawyers and bankers, I don't know who is. And what's really, and this blew my mind as we were researching this for our book, Giants, Gods, and Dragons. We kind of went into detail on all of this as to why we think Apollo, you know, even that laurel crown, you know, that was invented by Apollo, according to the Greeks, the Stephanos, as opposed to the diadem, the crown of royalty. I'd like to talk to you more about that. That's if anything, all you did is confirm what I understand is that the first. You mentioned 15 years ago, majority of people are still looking at the rider on the white horse, at least in our dispensational brother pre-trib rapture. That's the Antichrist, if you will. That's the false Messiah coming on the scene. But no, if you look at the 4th horse, like you mentioned, it mentions plague, war, famine, and wild beast. And I don't think that means lions and tigers and bears. I always like to say that would be like the Hitlers and the Maos and the Stalins and the powers and the principalities that control individuals such as that, if you will, is what sort of my take on wild beasts. You know, Sharon pointed out that the word translated beast is therion, which is the diminutive form of theria. So it could mean little beast or tiny beast. And that was where she made the argument that you're dealing with the rider on the pale horse with Ebola. And this was at the time that they had that outbreak in West Africa, which is unusual. Normally when Ebola breaks out, it's in Central Africa, Congo, Uganda, someplace like that. This was in Liberia and Ghana and Ivory Coast. They were having cases there. And you might remember that there were some cases that wound up here in the United States because they didn't shut down the international air flights from West Africa to the rest of the world. And so you had people showing up in Dallas and another in Cleveland who were infected. And thankfully it was contained. But thankfully Sharon's book was only relevant for a short period of time. I mean, there were quite a few people who died. I think it was like 14,000 deaths due to that outbreak in West Africa, which is the worst Ebola outbreak in history, if my memory serves. This is really Sharon's area of expertise, but she's the one who put us onto this line of thinking. And when you get, Apollo, our argument is that as the symbol of the Roman emperors, this laurel wreath crown of victory, the Stephanos, you can make the case that Apollo's, the victories of the rider on the white horse who went forth conquering and to conquer is Western civilization. I mean, Apollo was the god of, lyre. He was the player of music, the lyre. And Western civilization, Europe and North America is based on Greco-Roman art, philosophy, law, and literature, really. And even to a strong degree, it's, religion.
Well, and look at, again, the UN and the WHO logo. I mean, it has the wreath, the laurel crown surrounding it. You've got Doug's a strong supporter of the flat Earth, and on the UN logo you have the you have the flat Earth surrounded by this Stephanos, and on the WHO logo you have the serpent on the pole surrounded by. And again, it was I don't know who they are, Doug, but they were involved in this pandemic, okay? And they played us. They didn't play me. I walked around for like a day, I think, wearing a mask. And after that, I live in Alabama, Derek, so I just bebopped around wherever I wanted to.
Well, here in the Ozarks,
unless I went to court.
Here in the Ozarks, we were pretty much done with it by the spring of 2021. I think we were pretty much done with the masks. But I think the thing that is the really key point in saying, look, the rider on the white horse in Revelation 6 is not the Antichrist. It's the fact that when the beast does emerge, unquestionably, Revelation 13, he's wearing diadems, which is the crown of royalty, not the Stephanos, the crown of victory. There's a difference between that entity, the spirit of the Antichrist, and the spirit on the white horse. They're of different ranks. I think these entities, these sons of God who were worshipped by the ancient Greeks and Romans and Canaanites and Hurrians and Hittites and Amorites and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I think those are lesser Elohim. I think when this spirit of Antichrist comes out, he's a whole different class, which is why he's wearing a crown of royalty. Satan also wears a diadem. These are lower ranking, I believe. And again, this is speculative because the Bible's not explicit on this. But I think
like the Prince of Persia or the Prince of Greece, or like a lesser, in other words, okay, well, like in the like let's use America as an example. You get Alabama, okay, you get California. The guy in California is doing a really good job. The guy in Alabama and Missouri, he's got little pockets of control that he really controls, like Birmingham or St. Louis, etc. California, but that would be my analogy to these I don't want to call them minions, but lesser sons of God. Definitely not Yeshua being the only one of his kind, not created, but the sons of God. And I'm assuming you've probably, I've listened to some of your YouTube videos. I think I've read a couple of your books, and I need to get the name of that book you were just talking about, where y'all did the research on Apollo. Which one was that?
Giants, Gods, and Dragons, and we go through the four horsemen and explain why we make the case for these entities. It's hard to draw one-for-one connections between in the ancient pantheons because they lie and all that. But
Yes,
you know,
they do.
again, what's really interesting though is that we would have an easier time of understanding this if words like Rephaim, if words like Resheph, or the word translated pestilence, which is Dever, which was a known Canaanite entity, if they'd been transliterated instead of translated into the force of nature that they represent. But again, in Psalm 78, where Moses is retelling the plagues of Egypt, and he talks about how the cattle of the Egyptians had been destroyed by thunderbolts, that word is Reshephim, which is the plural form of the name of the plague god, Resheph. And we know. So, and then he goes on to say a company of destroying angels.
So Yah, the creator God, Yod He Vav He, however we want to say his name, and this is the way I look at Revelation. He is going to use these lesser sons of God as agents of judgment. They're under his control. I don't want to say they're on his team per se, but they have to take his orders. They're like a the star player that's got a bad attitude and that rebels or anything, but he's got to go in there and do his job. Except in this situation, they really have no free will. When it's time, when he unleashes them to act, they're going to act. They're going to do what they were created to do, if you will.
Well, yeah, and we see that in history. And again, in Habakkuk 3, verse 5, it talks about when God, came from Timon, which is a sort of a parallel with Mount Sinai. He's coming from the south, from Edom, as he's leading his people leading his people toward the promised land. God came from Timon, and the Holy One from Mount Paran, Sinai. His splendor covered the heavens. The earth was full of his praise. His brightness was like the light. Rays flashed from his hand. That's kind of appropriating the imagery associated with Baal, the storm god. And there he veiled his power. Before him went pestilence, Dever, that was that Canaanite pestilence deity, and plague, Resheph, Apollo, followed at his heels. Now, not all scholars agree with our interpretation of that this was an example of this, of God using these lesser Elohim to do his bidding, even if they didn't really want to. But I think that's what's in view there. It's certainly
agents of judgment.
Yeah.
Well, and just like in Revelation, I believe, the beast is going to execute judgment on the whore, on the harlot. I mean, the beast is going, the harlot's been riding the beast and everything, not following the one true God. And his agent of judgment is the beast, to judge this false apostate religious system, if you will. I mean, I hate to say it, but Roman Catholicism might as well be worshiping a sun god. It's at the upper. I'm not talking about Catholics that are deceived, but I'm talking about the upper echelons. They know who they worship. I mean, it's really not debatable if you understand the symbolism, and I know you do, Derek, from your research. I
think the other aspect of this is that you've got competition between members of the fallen realm for who is going to sit on Yahweh's throne, because they think they're actually going to take him down. I believe that they have enough hubris to think that they can somehow avoid
combine
the prophecies in Scripture, combine forces. It's like politics and human politics. You may have one political party who are all united in their effort to take back control of the Congress or the White House, but then they fight between themselves to see who's going to be the next Speaker of the House or Senate Majority Leader or the next president.
Yeah. See who's progressive enough or who's not progressive enough, like AOC and that little battle. And like we just saw, I don't really watch politics, but like we just saw, two or 3 weeks ago.
Sure. So why wouldn't the spirit realm be any different? I don't think it is.
Well, this is mind-blowing stuff. It's exciting, slightly scary, but as always, we want to remind people, let's keep our eyes on the Lord. I think we have this weird conundrum in Bible prophecy. On the one hand, it's pretty freaky stuff, right? If you start taking it seriously and you start really unpacking it, like, oh my gosh. But on the other hand, we're told not to worry, right? Because God is on the throne and nothing is going to happen that will be outside of his purview, right? Not to say that he's excited about everything that's happening, but he knows everything that's happening and he's allowing things to happen that will ultimately lead to the establishment of his kingdom, right? So I think we just have to be, kind of circumspect about prophecy and say, okay, the Lord gave us about 30% roughly of the Bible is prophecy. So we need to take that seriously. We need to be students of that. And yet remember that 2/3 is not prophecy. And a lot of it's just about, okay, Lord, help me live a good life today and be a good neighbor and be a good citizen and, and lead people to the Lord and his kingdom. So, it's kind of it's a balancing act, right? And I would just encourage people, don't stress out, don't freak out. Keep your eyes on the Lord, and it really is all going to work out. So whoever they
In
are,
the end.
God knows who they are, and he knows where their back room is, and so he's going to take care of that. So, man, Derek,
I want to circle back to something Scott said earlier, and this just dovetails with what you said, because he brought up Psalm 2, and that's a very important psalm to keep in mind, because it starts with the nations raging and imagining a vain thing. But verse 4 is very important to remember. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision.
Mm-hmm.
Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, as for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. So just remember, when you start getting upset about the activities of the World Economic Forum or whatever political party you're opposed to, just remember, God, the one who sits in the heavens, laughs and holds them in derision. Let's, as Doug said, keep our focus on him and what he wants from us, which is to make disciples of all nations.
And on that same note too, Isaiah 8, it talks about do not call this a conspiracy, what they call a conspiracy. And again, the focus is on, and I believe John in Revelation is quoting this. He says it's to the testimony and to the law. In other words, and in Revelation, it's the ones that the dragon will persecute and will pursue are those who have the law and the commandments. But those are the ones that are going to overcome. So if we are as close as I think we might be, again, worst case scenario, you get your head chopped off, and then you go to be with the Lord, and this time domain, it's over, it's done with. If things get bad enough, we're going to have that Paul attitude, Doug, like you said earlier. You're like, look, I'd like to live a little longer. I would too. I'd like to see my grandchildren. I would like, to continue to live a little longer. But if things got bad enough, and in certain areas of the world right now where they would probably like, Lord, if you want to take me out, go ahead. I'm fine with leaving now. So, but yeah, we just need to focus on the word, focus on truth. So,
amen.
And then everything will work out.
Amen. All right. Well, again, thank you, Derek. Where can people find you? I know you have a lot of irons in the fire, but kind of give people some direction where they can find you.
Best place is gilberthouse.org. That's where Sharon and I post all of our stuff, gilberthouse.org. And from there, you can find our weekly broadcast, Unraveling Revelation, my podcast, and so forth. I also do the daily news analysis for Skywatch TV, and you can find that at skywatchtv.com.
Very cool. Awesome. And your books, are those also at Gilbert House?
Amazon, but we've got to store it. We've got to store at Gilbert House, and if you go there, actually we get a better cut.
Okay.
And we sign all the books before we send them out, if that matters to you. But just our way of saying thank you, because we appreciate folks putting their trust in us and trust in me to remember to go to the post office.
your crack production team, administrative assistant team.
That's right. Our big operation is Sharon and me. That's it.
That's right. Yeah, and in case
at least you got Sharon
to people. Yeah, and in case it wasn't evident, Derek is an incredible researcher. So
thank you.
You will not be disappointed from the depth of research. It's pretty exciting stuff. So, well, again, thank you, everyone. So glad you joined us. If you want to become a patron, you can go to patreon.com/Doug Hamp, and little or as much as you want. Thank you for that. Shout out to the patrons. Join us next week. It's going to be awesome. Till then, God bless you and